Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the first chapter. Now the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took Mary as his wife. But they had no marital relations until she had borne a son, and he was named Jesus. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise be to Christ, who loved and forgave, conquering death, he rose from the grave. You may be seated. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Many of our favorite parts of the Christmas story come from the Gospel of Luke. The angel Gabriel's announcement of an unlikely birth to Mary, Mary's response, which we call the Magnificat, Mary's cousin Elizabeth, also pregnant at the same time and equally unlikely, the couple's journey to Bethlehem, no room at the inn, the birth in a cattle stall, the shepherds and angels out in the fields, and the babe lying in the manger. All of these come from the Gospel of Luke. And much of Luke's focus is on Mary. But this lectionary year that we just started a few weeks ago, we are in the Gospel of Matthew. And so today we have Matthew's telling of Jesus' birth. And for Matthew, it's more about Joseph than about Mary. In fact, every time an angel appears in the early parts of Matthew, the angel is appearing to Joseph. Matthew never tells of an angel appearing to Mary, as Luke does. So basically, in Matthew, we have the dad's side of the story. Matthew tells us, as Luke does, that Joseph is engaged to Mary. But the word engaged doesn't really do justice to the seriousness of this relationship. Other translations use the word betrothed to try to better describe that relationship. The reality is that Joseph and Mary were promised to each other legally. They were all but married. All that remained was for Joseph to take Mary home with him after their wedding, something that usually occurred about a year after the betrothal or engagement. It's also important to note that this arrangement was not usually by Joseph and Mary's choice, but was likely something their respective families had arranged. So, given the legal status of such an engagement, one did not break it off lightly. In fact, although our translation says that Joseph planned to dismiss Mary, other translations use the word divorce, that Joseph planned to divorce Mary. That's how serious this relationship was already at the time Mary is discovered to be pregnant. Now, in those days, a woman found to be pregnant without benefit of marriage was assumed to be guilty of fornication, if not adultery. And the punishment for adultery could be death by stoning. So Joseph had the right to have Mary shamed and even perhaps stoned for her condition. But we are told that Joseph was a righteous man, and consequently he decides to shield Mary from such dire consequences, though he still plans to divorce her. After all, she is pregnant with somebody else's baby. Joseph will just divorce Mary quietly and allow her family to send her away for her own protection and to save the family from further disgrace. It is at this moment when the angel appears to Joseph in his sleep. The angel tells Joseph to go ahead with the wedding and explains that Mary has not committed adultery, but has conceived a child through the Holy Spirit. And so Joseph does as the angel says. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Matthew never tells of an angel visitation to Mary. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Poor Mary finds herself pregnant, a very shameful situation in that culture, without knowing why or how. And don't forget, Mary is probably in her early teens. Although considered an adult by Jewish culture at that point, it still seems like a tremendous burden for her to carry. It is fortunate that she will have Joseph by her side, thanks to the angel's visit. Now the angel also tells Joseph that the child's name is to be Jesus. Many names in the Bible have some significance to that person's life or purpose. Sometimes people's names are even changed to reflect a new life. Abram, because Abraham means father of many, and God has promised Abraham that he would indeed be the father of many. Jacob becomes Israel after he struggles with an angel, because Israel means struggles with God or prevails with God. The meaning of Jesus' name is no less significant. Jesus is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Joshua. And the name Joshua means God saves or God's salvation. So Jesus' name describes what Jesus will do. He will be God's salvation for all people. Another trait of Matthew's gospel, besides focusing on Joseph, is that Matthew will often point out how events in the life of Jesus fulfill Old Testament prophecy. And in our reading this morning, Matthew tells us, all this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now, I just talked about the significance of names, and although Jesus is not formally named Emmanuel, it is one of the many descriptions that will be ascribed to Jesus over the course of his life and ministry, such as Son of God, Son of Man, Prince of Peace, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And yet this name from the prophet Isaiah is one of my favorites. As Matthew tells us, Emmanuel means God with us. And it is God's presence with us, with frail and flawed human beings, in human form no less, that is so significant to the nativity story and to Jesus' ministry on this earth. God didn't stay up in heaven proclaiming his love and salvation for us from on high. He came down to earth, to our level, to experience all the messiness of human life, and to bring us personally the gift of salvation, and to be present with us always. Amen. I invite you to stand as you are